We are back. Welcome to the Smart to Noise Ratio Pro Audio Podcast. I'm your humble host, Jon Dayton. To my side, your humble co-host, Anthony Kosobucki.
Hey there.
And want to first offer our apologies for not being on the air last week. We tried twice.
It was a hell of a week, man.
I was jam-packed with special events at work, and then both of us together were in and out of a studio session all weekend, which we will get to because that was fairly interesting.
Yeah.
It's actually my first time in a real studio in about 15 years. So that was cool. Anyway, we'll get back into it. Don't think we have too much to wrap up here just because we've had our heads down working so much this week. We haven't really been aware of much else going on in the world, much less our own lives. Which reminds me, we should do... I keep meaning to cover as a topic the effects of being a sound guy in your family. It's been mentioned in a couple of posts, but that's a whole chapter right there. So anyway, on the interesting product tip, we had said we were going to try and do this. I just happened to stumble across this thing today. Somebody, I think they actually bought us a dozen of them, and we're going to try them out. We both work at churches. We're sound guys at a church, and any of you who are wearing that same hat know that on Communion Week, depending on the method that your particular denomination uses, it is possible to wind up with thousands of tiny plastic cups on your stage. Like not many churches that use the tiny cup method still use glass ones.
No, yeah, it depends on the month. Like we do, our pastor is a big fan of, like, we're not a Catholic church at all, but we do communion every week because you think it's, the pastor is very attached to doing communion every week, which I totally agree with. But yeah, we do communion every week, and really what it comes down to is I get in there before the maintenance guys, so while I'm wrapping up cords and tying up headphone extensions, I just pick up all the cups and throw them out.
we only do communion once a month, and it usually takes 2 weeks afterwards to find where musicians squirrel away all the little cups. I usually step on a bunch right away and crunch them into confetti, little rice-sized granules of plastic. And anyway, I forget there's a term for it. I know when you grab a piece of bread and drink from the cup, that's called intinction, and I can't remember what the proper name is for the tiny cups method, which is why I keep referring to it as such. But at any rate, this little device, it's particularly challenging for like the musicians who are going to play during communion, you know? And with us, that's usually just one guitar player will stay up there, grab his acoustic, tickle away at some open chords. But, the pastor will approach him at one point with the stuff and try and perch it on a music stand or set it on an amp or put it on the floor next to their pedal board, which all those solutions are sort of equally nerve-wracking for a guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, what this little device is, it's a clip with some padding on it, and that goes on the lip of the music stand, and then it's got a little pivot ball joint and another clip that holds a disposable tray with an indentation in it where the wafer goes and a hole in it for the communion cup. So pastor can come around, set you up, and then when you stop tickling...
While a chord's going, you grab your elements and go on.
Yeah. So it, just a little, I don't know what they cost or whatever, but I thought that was kind of a neat invention. Thought it was cool that somebody came up with that. How about, seeing anything new on the horizon? Oh, I did hear, I'll double up. I got this.
It's okay. Go on. I got nothing other than stuff that's broken.
I'm currently on the fence as to which which bargain, essentially, which affordable small format digital mixer to get for work, because we're looking at getting one for dual purposes. One to handle in-ear monitor mixing, because I don't have enough outputs on my Midas to do stereo mixes for everybody that would like one. The other thing is to be able to multi-track services every week. I'm about to sneeze.
I'm surprised you haven't just landed on the Soundcraft and gone from there. I'm surprised there's still other options other than...
The only thing holding me back, the Soundcraft actually is the best option, I think, because the Behringer doesn't have quite enough outputs. Like, technically it does, but I'd have to do somebody's mix on the mains, which means that makes it trickier to do all the rest of the mixes post-fader. Okay. I won't get into why I want to do things like that, but... The only thing holding me back from getting the Soundcraft is that it does not, out of the box, have an option as the Presonai do, the Presonus desks, or the X32, to just plug it into a computer by FireWire or USB and use it as a multi-channel interface.
Oh, okay.
So some of those consoles, I think the Behringer, you can pop a USB drive in it and record the 2-mix, but you can also USB into a DAW and multi-track. Soundcraft doesn't do that out of the box.
Really?
But the workaround was, okay, it does have an expansion card, which you can, there's already half a dozen different options for it. CobraNet, MADI, a couple of the different things. Scheduled for release spring or summer. I hope it's this year. Scheduled for release is an option to give you USB and ADAT connectivity. So if that comes out, we'll be looking into one of those. Otherwise, it was going to be, okay, buy the desk, which is already a little bit more expensive. You know, the Presonus and the Behringer are right around $3,000 for the model we would need.
Between 2 and 33.
The Soundcraft's looking more like 35. Then you got to buy a MADI card. Then you got to call up Digico and get their MADI to USB box, which works really well from what I understand. I've heard a couple of people had glitches with them, but didn't seem like anything that a little computer knowledge couldn't sort out. But that'll give you 56-channel bi-directional USB 3 connectivity.
There you go.
Bammo. Which the argument is, okay, it's $1,100, but when we get a big Soundcraft in a couple of years, that's a device we're going to need. Yeah, and that'll take all the channels,
and it just sounds better. Like,
record all the things,
and like that's one of the things you like. I'm sure you won't have a hard time selling. Just it's going to sound better than the Behringer, the Presonus. It's going to be less noisy. I don't care. Like the Behringer sound like a really great option because it's got pseudo Midas pre's and all that stuff. But
yeah, climbing up the ladder, it's, you know, the Presonus it's okay. Like I'm willing to mix on a Presonus and deal with the less than perfect pre's just because it saves me having to drag out a bunch of outboard gear and you know,
and it works for live stuff. Like set it, forget. Well, not set it and forget it, but
it makes life
you're
easier.
done with it by the end of the day.
All the processing you want. But then, sorry, the magic box is on.
I put baseball on. I thought you'd be done. I'm going to find something else.
The commercials, you know, just moving pictures. It's a bed bugs commercial. That's why it's so horrifying. The Behringer has, you know, theoretically, you know, pre's that somebody whispered Midas over. Although the reviews are actually coming in pretty good for those, you know.
They're not bad.
The Soundcraft has actual VI mic pre's in. Like, no bones about it. Like, these are the pre's we use in the VIs. We skimped on some other stuff to get the price down. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm for that. So that's that was the tidbit. The new gear tip is that Soundcraft is going to come out with USB connectivity. So there you go. And the show just ran out of gas. So we are
about the studio.
We are. Well, yeah. We're going to do that, but first, I think we ought to dive into patch bays. And we're going to try not to go too long on this, but just not everybody knows what they are. You know, if you're working all in the box, all of this stuff is going to kind of make sense to you because, you know, a DAW is a console, a tape machine, and a patch bay.
Right.
So all the concepts are there. Just you haven't run into.
There's no physical aspect to it. There's no, and that like. We should get into the normaling and the half normaling a little bit.
Yep, I actually wrote, by the time this airs, there will have been an article on the blog, which if you're a listener and not yet a reader, check out smart2noise.blogspot.com. And depending on when you're seeking that, it'll either be right there a couple days ago, or if you are listening to this far, far in the future, just do a search. The post is called Patch Bays, quite simply. And for those of you not familiar with what these are, it's usually a single-space piece of rack gear with a row of 24 quarter-inch jacks and another row under that. And on the back, same thing. And internally, there are some connections. There's two different sizes. And let's see how I'm going to go about this. Well, the smaller size, which is not quite as small as like an 1/8-inch jack. I forget the exact dimensions, but it's smaller and it gives you a higher density of patch points in your racks, which if you're trying to keep your patch bay close to your desk, which they do in a lot of studios, using the smaller style, which is called Bantam or TT, which stands for tiny telephones. And the reason for that is patch bays were invented for the phone system before there were electronic switches.
Right.
Mabel sat at a patch bay and pulled a circuit up out of the desk and plugged it into a bay to connect you to the correct number.
I'm trying to think what movies that was. What movies? I watched something recently where you see people driving around on roller skates. And
I'm going to go back and I'm going to look up a picture of Mabel. Like, I'm going to find some old Bell System operator pictures. No, I'm not, because I always say I'm going to post stuff on the blog and then I don't.
But yeah, it's
consistency,
people plugging
folks.
stuff into it's reconnecting a line is really what it's doing. It's taking what your output is and putting it somewhere else to get you to where you need to go.
Right. So typical usage would be, let's say you've got a snake coming in from the live room. You plug that into the back in the top row. All right. So those are your lines coming in. In the bottom of the back row, you plug lines that connect to the inputs on your console or your DAW
or your pre's or whatever, wherever you got them routed.
Right. Well, let's keep it simple. Let's just say it's okay. Let's just say what you just said. Then, so with no connections made on the front, if your bay is a normaled bay, then snake input 1 shows up. It's a normal connection. The normal state of it, without anything plugged into the front, is routing that straight through to whatever's plugged into the bottom of the row.
Right.
And you can do that for whatever you plug in. Excuse me. Man, I got sick this week too. That'll come up. That'll come up later. So then what you can do is if you want to reroute mic number 3 to input number 14, you grab a short little patch cable and you plug into the top row on the front that corresponds with snake input 3, and you move it over to channel 4 on the bottom row, and it makes that connection. What that also does is it frees up the other 2 inputs. So mic snake 14 coming in is now free to be patched somewhere else, and so is input 3 on your desk.
And it keeps everything where it's supposed to be. So 1 through 24 is always going to be 1 through 24, and you can switch it. So you don't have, once everything is set in the back of the patch bay, you don't have to go back there again.
And in studios, a lot of the backs of the patch bays are hard soldered in, which removes half of the points of possible failure.
Right.
But you have to think very carefully about what you're doing. So if you're like, the best thing is just to take every jack in the studio, bring it up on the patch bay. So that way you're not ever sliding racks out and trying to get around behind stuff. But when this particular scenario is particularly important, see if I can say particular again in this sentence. This was really important in the tape days. If you're doing multiple takes, if you're going to take that guitar that's on input 12, do a track on 12. Now you want to bump them over to 13 to double it or to take another pass.
Right.
Instead of crawling around behind the console and popping that mic cable out and popping it into the next channel, you just reach over to your patch bay,
grab a little jumper,
move it over again, and that's how you accomplish things.
It's a little easier to track things down that way too.
Right. Now, if you're working in a DAW, you just click the assign window and perform the same function with a drop-down menu. Where this does still come into play in the digital age is if you're using various analog pre's, like we were in the studio. I'm going to set up the studio talk here so we can transition nicely. They had a bunch of 192s in there to get things into Pro Tools, but for a little bit of analog warmth on the way in. Now, the 192s are actually not pre's, correct? Like, they're just looking for a line level input.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the reason they had a 192 and a 96 in. So there's 24 channels that they had straight in, but they need to get up to that level. So they had 3 Focusrite Octopre's or whatever they were. I don't think they make them anymore, but
they do. But there's a newer.
Okay, all right. So whatever it is, there's 8 actual mic pre's to get it up to that level, and there are 3 of them, so 24. All the way in. So maybe it's the 192 is 16, the 96 is 8, or whatever. And then that goes into Pro Tools, and you can drive it from there.
Yep. So in this particular case, you had your snake inputs coming in from the live room. Picture those in a row, 1 through whatever on the top row. On the bottom row, in the back, were the inputs to the Octopre's. So if you're not doing any changing around, if channel 1 in the live room is channel 1 in your DAW, you can leave everything alone. The signal will come in from the mic, hit the Octopre, come out of that line level, and get routed straight into a 192. Right. And then if you want to start rearranging things, you can. Now, they had the first 16 normaled through, but then they also had a third Octopre that you could just patch in wherever you needed it. And that was where we broke in. We actually unplugged a few channels of that and plugged into, we had a couple Neve channels and a couple Joe Meek channels that we patched in.
Yep, and some, what else do we have? There's a Toft and an Avalon, too, that we used. So I think we used 2 channels off that Octopre and then the other... another 6.
Well, the Toft was already in the bay, but yeah. And that's what made it convenient. So like all these pre's were, I mean, in our case, it was 24 of the same pre. But if you're in a room that's got a couple of Neves, couple of APIs, couple of this, couple of that, it makes it really easy to mix and match
and use what you want. That's another plus of the patch bay, is getting to use what you want on what. So you can still run your kick in on one, kick out on two, and all that stuff, and then repatch it to, I think we did kick out on one of the Neves, kick in on
straight in. But yeah, we
all that stuff. So you can still wire like you would a normal live sound gig, like wire directly.
Right. And I thought of a better way to incorporate the external pre's next time, because another facility that the studio has is another set of inputs in the ISO booth and another set of inputs in the control room. So we actually unplugged a couple of the octos to plug in these Neve and Joe Meek channels, but what we could have done was just patch those into the wall and used adapters or whatever, because the jacks on the wall in the studio just show up as points on the patch bay.
Right.
Once they're in there, you don't have to worry about, that's a female XLR, I need a male XLR. You can just connect whatever to whatever. So,
but then you still have to get them into the 192 or the 96, and that was where our problem started. Trying to sort out channels to get into.
Yeah. We didn't avail ourselves of the normaling as well as we could have this weekend, and that was where it took some time to get everything plugged in. Also, the studio is really not built to track a band.
No, it's built for post. Like I'm friends with the engineer and stuff. He's like, most of the stuff we do is post editing for movies.
Right. So they actually roll a screen down and don't even look into the live room.
Right. No, it's
or they're doing ADR in there or whatever.
Right. So they got two channels at max.
Yeah. So to cram a 24 input project in there was quite the achievement. He actually, the house tech had us leave the patch bay.
He wanted to see.
I was about to pull. He's like, no. I want to see what you guys did. And the text message came back later. Wow. I was like, wow, you guys are dumb. Why did you do that? Or wow. And I guess
it was just a wow.
It was a real wow.
I haven't heard anything else back since.
But what we could have done is, instead of using the patch points for those pre's that were already in the racks, we could have just patched the Neve channels and the other pre's that we brought into points in the wall, and then picked them up from those inputs on the patch bay, and then routed them into the 192s. Now, the danger of a patch bay, there's two big things you need to watch out. One is just it adds so much convenience, but there are so many things to go wrong.
Thank God we didn't have ribbon mics.
Well, that's one thing. You can easily send phantom power somewhere that you really don't want phantom power,
from a bunch of places,
to a ribbon mic, or send phantom. I've actually done this at work where I've sent phantom power into the input of another device that really wasn't interested in dealing with 48 volts DC. Fortunately, it didn't kill anything, but you can also create some catastrophic feedback loops. Ground loop issues can be more common, and just straight up failure. Patch cords are cheap. They fail.
Yeah.
Like, even good patch cords are still not that far up the chain in terms of quality gear.
Right.
Even if you're paying $12 a pop for hand soldered Mogami.
Yeah, I think that's numbers. What they were all Mogami and like top of the line Monster.
There was one bad one in there.
Right. Yeah.
Boy, was that a bugger. Like, are we wrong, or is the pre broken, or what? Oh, it's just a bad patch cable.
Threw that sucker at the wall and
so it's
left it there.
You're adding a lot of failure modes to your rig in order to have that convenience. But you got to have it. I mean, otherwise you're yanking gear out all the time to get around to the back side of it and patch stuff in. So what makes it useful, like I have a patch bay in my live setup. So in an installed space, I've got every input, all 48 inputs from the stage show up, and those are normaled through to the 48 inputs on the board. Now, if I want to plug in an acoustic guitar on channel 13, but he's not anywhere near a snakehead that has a 13 on it, I can
put
just like
27.
Yeah, go into this floor pocket with 28 on it. I go to the patch bay and I put snake input 28 to channel 13. Boom, done. It works.
Yep.
Mostly. I have some gremlins. Then I also have all my aux outs, all my group outs, and all my channel and group insert points. So anytime I want to throw compression on something, all I got to do is duck down to the patch bay. And like this is when we were talking about normaling before.
And theoretically, it works.
Yep. My compressors, because of the normaling and the way they're plugged in, without anything plugged into them, the input of the crossover is normal to the output of the crossover. So they just sit there and loop by themselves when nothing's plugged into them. But you plug... you come out of a channel insert into a compressor input, then out of that compressor output and back into the insert return. And there you go. And that's an old school that's not inserts on a single jack. That's balanced signal all the way out. So they can actually be a little bit quieter. If your desk has separate balanced ins and outs for the inserts, you're not ever dealing with unbalanced signal in your rack, which that can actually save you some ground loop noise when you're patching in outboard gear.
Right. And now, it's a lot shorter cable run too. Yep. Like you don't have to add in another 10 feet of whatever cabling to get from here to there.
And it'll let you build a signal chain. Like in my case, I'm not adding external pre's or anything like that. But let's say I want to go, I want to take my kick drum channel, and I have a really nice outboard EQ that I like better than the Neve or the Midas EQ that I have on my console. So I go out to that EQ, and then I hit a DBX 160 because I like those on bass. And then I want to hit a subharmonic synth. Boom, boom, boom in the patch bay. If all the inputs and outputs of those pieces of gear are there, I don't have to crawl around or underneath anything. I can just locate my points, patch them in, and there you go. So that's pretty much patch bays in a nutshell. I don't know if we need to get into half normaling because we didn't have any. Although it's kind of an interesting topic. Like
a bit.
What half normaling does is basically if you turn the bay around. Some of them are convertible where you open it up and you actually turn around. Each channel is a little card with 4 jacks soldered to it. And you can turn those around so that whatever is coming in the upper row in the back is still going out to the bottom row in the back, even if you plug in something in the front.
It works nice for like parallel.
It works, yeah. If you're building parallel signal chains where if you have 2 really nice...
If you want to run like... Okay, you run your Neve on both channels, but you only want to compress through an 1176 on one of them. You run it out to that, and you still get your Neve clean on one channel, and then your Neve plus 1176 on the other one.
You can do that, or it allows you to monitor the direct signal separate from the processing. So if you're doing some really funky whack processing, you still want to monitor, you can pop into the front of a half normal deck or bay and bring that up somewhere else. Now, where I've found them useful is in a couple church setups. They use these Aviom setups, which is you feed 8 or 16 channels of audio to the musicians on stage, and they have a little digital mixing pod where they can dial up their own levels. But if you have 24 or more channels at front of house, you've got some work to do to boil that down to 8 for your musicians. So that means you need to get a drum bus together and send them a mono or a stereo drum bus, and maybe a key group and do that.
Yeah.
And maybe your background singers are all just on a group or something like that. But
unless you have a monitor desk for a front of house desk, and
right,
then all your problems are solved, like mine.
Right. So you need a way to sort that out. We're going to change stuff week to week because most church bands change week to week. Even if you have mostly the same musicians, something's going to be different. You're going to have different needs. So what you can do is throw a half normal bay in there and bring a direct, either bring the snake into it and then hit the board. So that's one way of doing it. The other way is, let's say your Aviom system has 16 inputs. You get a 16, or probably 2 8-channel recording snakes, balanced snakes. You come out of the direct outs on every channel on the board. So you bring 24 direct outs into the bay, and then you can split them out to go to... Actually, the reason I used it was because they wanted to record, to multi-track their their services and do Aviom sends. So they brought 24 channels direct out of the board into a half normal bay. One of the splits sent every one of those channels straight out to 3 channels of ADATs, and then 16 of those 24 could be patched into the Aviom head unit, which sat right below it in the rack. So that meant the signal path for all that stuff was really short.
Right.
It only added 12 inches of cable to bring any one of those things into the Aviom gear, and it functioned basically as a Y-split snake. Now, there is a slight penalty. You can encounter some ground loops. You can have a little more noise. There's a little signal loss because each direct output is now driving 2 inputs. But all in all, it was a fair solution, and it was not expensive. The patch bay was $48. The patch snakes, I think they bought hoses. They didn't buy really good ones.
Right.
But the patch snakes were like $50 a piece.
But as long as your front of house product is okay and your ears are manageable, I think we've got hoses driving our Avioms and stuff. But
hoses are okay if they were made right in the first place, because they make millions of them, and you need to check that stuff right out of the box and make sure it's not make sure they're not polarity cables. Although if you do find some polarity cables, it's handy to keep those around. But hoses are fine if you're going to put them somewhere and hide them. So behind the rack, they're perfectly all right. But anyway, an inexpensive half-normal deck and a couple of recording snakes solved that church's issues for well under $200, including my fee to come plug it in because it took me all of 18 minutes to do that for them. And then they were able to accomplish two purposes with one set of direct outs. Everything still sounded fine. Everybody had what they needed. Good to go. So hopefully that covers everything for patch bays. And if you don't get it, that's fine because
it takes a while.
Yeah,
like once it works fine on paper and theory, and you can listen to it and talk about it all you want. But until you get into one and you encounter all the problems that, like, not necessarily problems, but just different ways of setting stuff up that we did this weekend, you don't really get it.
Yeah, I didn't really know. Well, we'll get to it, I guess, but I didn't really know what my purpose was going to be because we already had like the two guys that wrote the songs who both have great ears for music, and Anthony, who has freaking dog ears for audio and good ears for music. Our buddy Brandon, who's been on the podcast before, although quite a while ago. We actually need to get him back on.
Yeah.
He was driving the desk and also somewhat producing, like helping with arrangements and playing. And then, all the musicians in the room who are some of them, have really good skills in that area too. And then me. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to say that they're not really in need of my opinion on a lot of things. Like, if it comes down to a tiebreaker, I'll speak up, but I'm pretty much going to keep my mouth shut, and I'm just going to make it my job to make sure everything works.
Yeah. And
it paid off because I wasn't in anybody's way, but when something was up, like, we can't get the thing to thing. And that was when I would jump in and stick my nose in the patch bay and sorted all that stuff out. And it was a hectic time. And we rolled in at 3, had everything loaded in. And then it was 11:30 at night by the time it all worked.
Sorted out by like 10, and then we ran a couple things.
No, we didn't start running stuff till after 11.
Oh, okay.
Because Holt walked in the door at like 11:50.
You guys good? Oh no, that was 2.
Yeah, let's
on the beat. Yeah, hold on a second.
We're not going to do a third take. Thank you. Good night. But all right. So yeah, that's enough about patch bays. But yeah, until you've used them, it's hard to wrap your mind around. Yeah, I mean, get on Wikipedia. Wikipedia does some pretty good explaining. Sound on Sound had a great article that I actually used to brush up just in case, because half normaling just doesn't come up all that often.
Right.
So I looked that up just in case.
Yeah, but they were smart about how they put it in. Like, the guy that built the room and installed all the stuff built Eric Clapton's room. So he knew what he was doing. He's pretty good at what he does. Eric Clapton and Peter Gabriel Phil Collins wouldn't ask him to build a room for him if he didn't know what he's doing, But either way, all that kind of stuff comes up.
Cool. Well, yeah, we can why don't we move into the project? I'll lay it out again. We've talked about it a little bit. We've been getting ready at my church for quite a while. My boss and his writing partner have been coming up with music for quite a while. We've rehearsed our bands. They've played the songs in services on Sundays. We've done some video shoots just of our band, playing Sunday morning and put those out for people to absorb. And now we're at the point where we're ready to sit down, and all the stuff we've had so far was just, keyboard stuff that was done in Logic as demos. Mm-hmm. And then we have service recordings, which are not that great because all I can get off the 2 mix is, where the faders need to be for things to work in the room. And it's a mono mix. Like, right. I'm able to pan stuff from my recording mix, but it's still, the guitars aren't where they need to be in the recording because they're where they need to be for the room.
Right, and that's your first goal.
Right, so they're not bad. I mean, you click on the videos and watch them. They're okay recordings. I'm not ashamed of them, but they are what they are. So, and my boss's ethos on things is, we want to do the best thing that we can. Like, not we don't bring up religion a whole lot on these things on this podcast, but his philosophy and all of our philosophies is like, all right, well, we're doing this for God, so let's not half-ass it, basically. Mm-hmm. So, what originally started as, all right, we'll try and do some tracks here at church and we'll get the songs together just so we can get them out to people, turn it into like, no, let's really do this.
Right.
So,
and having an awesome resource at your disposal, pretty much.
Yeah, so it just so happens. So this guy has a fairly good studio down the road from our church, goes to our church, says, yeah, come down anytime you want. So,
made almost the cover of Mix Magazine in 2008. Was on the top 10 lists of new rooms in 2008.
It's a pretty sweet room.
Yeah.
It's busy too, so we were actually pretty lucky to get a whole weekend in there for nothing, basically.
Right. Yeah.
So we did a bunch of rehearsing, actually they were still writing new material, like right up to the point of going in. But we did the first 4 songs. Went in the week before, right after church on Sunday. We got all the cats that were going to be playing on it in the same room, and that was 2 drummers. One was going to do 2 songs, the other one was going to do 2 other songs. A couple of bass players, bunch of guitar players, and we just hashed that stuff out. We spent about 2 hours on the first song, and then increasingly less time as we got our feet under us. But actually, a week before we went in, they were rearranging stuff and writing new parts and changing drum parts and figuring out, all right, no, don't play that part, but let's try it on this guitar through that amp, so that we didn't have to sit there in the studio and work all that stuff out.
Felt like such a jerk rewriting drum parts for people since I don't actually play drums.
So anyway, that was just cool because it was a continuation of the collaborative process. Like, it became not just my boss's songs that he had written. Now everybody had some skin in the game because they had helped to make decisions like, no, let's see if we can work in a halftime thing for the drums. Oh, yeah, try it here. No, that's not it. No, we got to build up to it. Do this, do a fill, do something more dense, then go to halftime. Then the fourth time, break it back down. Yeah. Okay. So that was amazing to see. So we hit the studio, loaded in, spent 9 hours getting patch right because it was one of those situations where there was only one way all of that stuff was going to fit in. And even, after having worked with it for a weekend and then sat down and done a postmortem on it, there wasn't much we could have changed. There was not much at all we could have done differently.
We maxed out inputs. Our room mics, so we could hear people talking, was John's MXL hard patched into the wall.
Well, let's lay that out. So let's swing by the D command, and then we'll get into what we had to do to. So the room has a D command in it, which is basically an $80,000 mouse. It's got a bunch of automated faders on it. It's got the Q section in it for tweaking the monitors. And you can actually touch plugins on it. Like, there's an EQ section, and you can pull up an EQ plugin and turn real knobs and have it change your plugin. And there's a dynamics section on it. And you can do all the routing in it, and you can mix on it and record automation on the faders.
But unless you're super slick on it, it's just easier to use a mouse.
Everybody grabbed the mouse, and including Anth and myself, who have
I tried so hard to use that
thousands of
damn
hours
thing
on analog and digital desks in the live room. We're like, in the live realm, like, we were actually both kind of excited. Like, yeah, I'm going to learn this thing. I'm going to be pushing faders around and hitting record enable buttons.
Oh, son of a bitch! Nope. The batteries in the mouse are dead again.
So so not only is it an $80,000 mouse, it was an $80,000 shelf for the mouse that actually got used on the session, and it has, it's got a glorious meter bridge on it that the monitors are in front of. The computer screens block all but 4 of the meters.
I moved them I moved them up to make sure we weren't clipping. That's all, and then I put them back down. That was it.
So the only thing we would have used on it was the talkback button, except that didn't work
because we had to move around. Like, there are 2 sets. The main speakers were Dyne Audio. I don't know the model numbers.
Something.
And they had NS10s, but something was goofy with the NS10 sends, so they had to repatch them. And something in the line.
It was because of the connectors that they used to get between the live room and the equipment rack out in the hall. The talkback slate and the sends to the NS10s and something else, like, they were all on this one D sub 25 connector, and it was messed up. So the house guy was like, yeah, I kind of know what it is, because Brandon, the lead engineer, asked, like, oh, can we get the NS10s going? And honestly, we barely used them. I mean, like, I think
we used them a lot for the first couple songs to get sounds, and I would toggle back and forth just to make sure nothing was real goofy and nothing was too funky. But
after a while, we wound up listening on the mains more, just because there were 14 people in the room who all more or less had some input.
Right.
The producers, and it was nice, they actually sat on the couch and back, and we're just chilling from back there.
That couch is gold.
Yeah, and the mains sound good back there.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was nice. We were able to keep it at a modest level, so like nobody's ears got wrung out. Although I don't know, we'll get to that. So anyway, the talkback button didn't work. So in order to talk out to the musicians, we just plugged a mic in, got it into a pre, got it in somewhere. Oh, we gave up a piano channel.
Yeah,
we were going to take stereo out of the Nord. We took the Nord mono. Got into Pro Tools, record enabled a channel, and that was the talkback, and we got that into the Q mixes for people. But then we couldn't hear them once we closed the doors. So I threw up a large diaphragm condenser in Omni mode, brought that into the control room, and then went, oh crap!
There's nothing left. We are at 24.
We are right out of pre's, and I think Brandon had a rack with a pre in it, but like there was no.
That's what we drove the talkback into the room with.
Oh, right. But yeah, so there was just nowhere to put it to get it into Pro Tools. Like, we were fresh out of inputs. So I went out to the car, I got my little Scarlett 2i2 that we bring the podcast to you every week, plugged that into my MacBook,
laptop,
because it won't wake up unless it's plugged into a MacBook. Plugged the mic into that, woke up Logic, got it going, and so we would talk out through this.
It was a Beta 57.
Through a Beta 57, and everybody in the room would shout back through this. That was an MXL Omni, and we would listen on a laptop, which was somewhat inconvenient.
Yep.
But it worked. I had a foot switch in my box out in the car that I used for as a foot switch for drummers that wear headsets, so they can flip them off, switch them off. We got that out, and that was it. It was. There's some pictures around. We'll get them up eventually. There's a shorty boom stand with a Beta 57 on it, and this clunky Radio Shack box with a big red smack button on it to turn the thing on and off.
Before we got that in, I said all kinds of awful things.
Well, that's the thing. And the reason you need to be able to turn, like, a lot of guys will actually give you advice, like, you have to be careful how much you talk in the control room while people are out in the live room, because they start to have doubts like, oh man, we just finished that take and I can see them all talking there, but they're not talking to us. And then you're like, oh, they finally click on it. Like, all right, that was great. We're moving on. Right. But that's angst that nobody needs. But on the other side too, if you have somebody out in the live room who's having some trouble getting a take, and you're like, analyzing and dissecting and chewing over this guy's performance, he doesn't necessarily need to hear all that. He needs to hear what that conversation boils down to in order to not be demoralized and to hear what he needs to hear to get on with the next take. So, and that was, Brandon actually said that at one point. He's like, yeah, I'm really bad about switching this off, and I'm saying some really demoralizing things.
Oh, I did too. Like, can we just get him to not play like a dick?
Did that go out?
Yeah. Yep.
Never mind.
You know who it went to.
Yeah.
After I left, he played great, though.
Oh, and then we all got sick. So
yeah, everybody got sick.
After a full week I had special event after special event after rehearsal after special event in-house at work, and then we went into the studio and we didn't pull all-nighters, but we pulled some late nights. And then on Sunday, people just started throwing up. We had a guitar player come in looking pretty green.
Yeah.
And I got to hand it to that guy, Sal. He doesn't listen, but man, if you're out there, what a trooper. I mean, he's this guy. That's just how dedicated he is. Like he came in looking utterly seasick, propped himself up, played his parts, and like nobody would have held it against him if he had gone home and said, all right, have somebody else play the parts, or I'll get him another time. But he really stuck it out, and I think he made a quantum leap in his playing. Like something, I don't know if in the midst of the hallucinations from the influenza, he found a higher level of consciousness or something. That his playing was definitely.
When we wrapped, he was getting there.
And so anyway, it's Sunday. I had to mix church. I was actually the only person from Worship Arts on staff who was there. Everybody else was volunteers, and it was a wild weekend on top of that, which I won't get into. But we were, for a place that usually has everything planned out and nailed down, we were shooting from the hip a good deal. So that was exciting. Felt like running a festival stage again. Like, all right, they're going to do something here. I don't know what. Hang on. Like, be ready to click on something. Be ready to bring something up. Here we go. So I walk back in, and not too long after that, we finished some takes, and Brandon, who is, sort of lead producer, lead engineer, stands up and says, I don't care what you guys do next. I got to get some air. And we all figured out, it was just the pressure of having to sit between the other producers in the band and, manage all this complex stuff, that it was just, and he's a mechanical engineer at a pretty high level for his day job. He's kind of a rocket scientist.
He is. He's actually a rocket scientist.
And a really good guitar player. So, like, he really understood all the elements of the game. Mm-hmm. But, after a 9-hour day and a 12-hour day and most of another, he was already 6-7 hours into another day, I figured he was just worn.
Right. Yeah.
Nope. He was throwing up in the bathroom. So that was when I got my initiation into actually running a Pro Tools session. I jumped in there and started pushing stuff around, but that was interesting. Those two guys got really, really sick, and I was starting to feel something. All I caught was a cold that my kids gave me. But, all in all, though, I gotta say, it was a pretty unique experience for me, because I've worked on sessions, like when I used to record bands in my garage, only 4 guys in the band, no girlfriends on the session, no friends hanging out, just the 4 guys in the band, and it would still come to fist fights that spilled out on my lawn, guys getting mad and driving off, the band breaking up and then getting back together. We had 14 14 people actively involved in the session, and sometimes 16 people in the room, because there was a videographer, and we usually have one or more visitors. It was a lot of people, especially when the major takes were done and we were down to just overdubbing guitar parts.
We still had 10 people around.
Right. So you got one guitar player out in the live room sweating it out. 3 or 4 guys are out, taking a walk or checking their email or whatever, or eating. And then there's still 10 guys in the control room.
Yeah.
And it never degenerated. It was never even like a walking on eggshells kind of moment. Like everybody just stayed so classy and worked so well together that it was truly blessed. I will say I don't think there has been a session like that.
It's been a while.
Yeah. So I don't know, what else can we talk about here?
I'm trying to think.
Pre-planning.
Yeah, pre-planning. The amount of time me and Brandon spent sorting out not even phase issues, but like, because he's a rocket scientist, like me standing out there and just breathing on something to get it lined up the right way. Like, there's...
well, what stuff did you guys tweak like that? Because I know we got drum overheads pretty quick.
Drum overheads were okay, and then we messed around with close mics a lot, because there were some... We swapped kick mics a couple times. For the most part, we used a D6 and a Beta 91 for everything. And those were okay. Like, those weren't a big deal phase wise, but like the snare miking thing that I do, like we did, I don't know what was on the bottom, I think it was a 57, but on the top we did an I5, and then I taped a 451 to it, but the capsules didn't exactly line up. So I think you were out there literally shimmying in gaff tape and re-gaff taping stuff together to make sure it was just perfect, and
did a little bit of that,
and swap stuff out and switch to an RE20 and some CAD large diaphragm condenser, and me going out and just pushing it just a touch with my foot going back in, because Brandon was probably puking or doing something, and like making sure that was lined up, going back out, kicking it a couple more inches forward, like all that kind of stuff. But at the end, like no phase issues at all, which is pretty cool to not have to sort out later on.
Yeah, for having 14 drum mics.
Yeah, I mean.
The other cool thing was like, and this is the true, like he actually has an engineering degree, goes to a job, it says engineer on his business cards. Like that's his real deal day job. So like he is every bit of that personality, but also a really cool rocker. Like, so he's got really the best of both. But like, it was just so funny. Like we had a lunch meeting a couple of days before, Anthony and Brandon and myself, we sit down, snap. Like he literally brings paperwork out and snaps it. It's like, all right, so I had here's my ideas about mics and patching.
That's even in the control room, like we were sitting around, and like the producer that we flew in from Texas, who's the worship pastor's good friend or best friend, whatever he is. He's like, I was thinking about a couple other things, and Brandon literally just rips out of his shirt pocket, like, oh, I have some ideas. Whap! 11 by 17 sheets with like check marks, like check boxes, circles, all kinds of stuff. Like, this is what we should do here, and just hands one out to everybody in the room. He's got, I don't know how he managed to fit like 14 11 by 17 papers in his.
His shirt pocket is like Doctor Who's phone booth,
but he didn't have a shirt pocket. I don't know where they came from.
But actually, what he had done was, it was particularly important for the guitar parts, just because there were so many layers. Like there are really at least 3 guitar parts on every song, and some of them have 6. So what he had done was just gone through. He made a spreadsheet with every song on it, and then every
charted out by like. Well, he charted out by intro, first verse, first chorus, pre-chorus. Like,
right. So those were the columns. There was a column for every section of the song, and then a row for every instrument. And, for the drums and stuff, the drums were obviously there on everything, and bass was there on everything. But then when it came down to things like piano, backing tracks, and guitars, like the majority of it was really guitars, he would make an X if, there was a clean guitar, a dirty guitar, a rhythm part, a lead part, an arpeggiated part, whatever that was, that showed up in a row, and he would put an X if we needed that in a particular session.
Right.
So if we needed, once we got through, like, all right, did we miss anything? We can go back and say, oh, no, we didn't do the arpeggiated part in verse 2 of this song.
Right.
So you can
go back, redo that.
So the out-of-town producer, / writer says, yeah, we need to figure out something to do about guitar parts, another guitar part for that. And you just hear, snap. Out comes the Excel sheet.
I've got ideas.
I've got a few ideas for that. Like just with one eyebrow up, Austin Powers style. It was that was the power move. That was the MVP play of the weekend.
That and the stiff in the pocket.
Yeah, there were a couple. Yeah, there was some for a church session. You would have been surprised, maybe. There were some dirty jokes, some clean but dirty jokes. Like
it was no Joe session, but
yeah. All right, well, how are we doing on time here? Not bad, not bad. We got 3/4 of the show down. I haven't gone too far off topic. Let's see. You got anything?
Some of the guitar layering stuff, like everything, all guitars. We kind of live tracked, but what we did was we took a clean line off of everything. So an electric guitar in particular, would go into a DI, and we take a clean line off of that, and then send that into the amp. So there was a 57 on whatever amp we were using, but pretty much everything is getting reamped. That's regardless. And I think we spent more time working on making sure the reamping section of the guitar was better suited for reamping than the actual live sound was, which was kind of neat. I think at one time we had 3 actual guitar amps going at the same time in one ISO room with a bunch of gobos in between them.
Yeah. That was actually, I was surprised.
The funky ground issues we had with some of the DIs.
I was really surprised how many issues we had. Now, anytime you add a DI to a guitar rig, you can create a loop there because you do. The DI is connected to the console. The guitar is connected to the DI. The DI is also connected to the amp. The amp is also mic'd. The mic isn't obviously a ground loop issue, but we'd been using active DIs because we wanted obviously to get the best frequency response, and those do better. They pick up the highs better. Right. But pro tip of the day: active DIs are not as effective at rejecting common mode noise, ground loop hum,
right,
power hum. They're not as good at that.
There's some serious power issues in that place,
which is weird. You would think they would have that nailed down better.
I did not feel bad at all about my recording setup after we did that. I was like, we got just as many chords on the floor as we do in my joint, and this place cost $500,000.
Right. But even after we left the first night and came back the next day, I had the thought, okay, it must be that the pre's that the DIs are plugged into are not on the same leg or whatever, as the guitar amps. So we wound up moving the power for all the guitar amps, literally plugged it into the same Furman that the Octo pre that was picking up all that stuff, and we still had buzz. So and it wasn't the kind of buzz that you could he's holding a Fender. Turn 90 degrees. It wasn't that kind of buzz that you could just get rid of. It was really pervasive. So we might actually look into, I know Furman makes an ISO trans.
I think they do.
We might do something. We're going to have to do something different next time. I was trying to think, what if we could do a mix competition? You can distribute it because they want to have an EP ready. The album's not scheduled to be done until the fall, like November, because we have, we got 4 songs done this weekend, major tracking. Now we have vocal overdubs and electronic parts to add in. We're going to do 4 more songs in another section, and then hopefully, I think we only have 10 songs written at the moment, but I'm thinking they're trying to get to 12 total. But they want to have 4 ready for when we play a festival this summer. One of our house bands is going to go play at the Kingdom Bound Festival, which is just up the road here. So,
I have a solution for that.
What's that? Oh, thanks. I was worried we'd turn the tracks loose out there in the wild, have like a Dave Pensado style Indaba mixing contest, and see if any of the listeners want to take a crack at it. Get in touch with us if you do. We may not have a wide open to the public contest, but it might be cool just to see what some other voices say, and then have Anthony's mix go on the EP.
We'll see. Well, there's a plus to having a SSL and $1 million worth of outboard at your disposal, I guess.
For the low price of $500 a day.
I could probably get that down. I bet you I can work that down if I just do it from 3 to 7 in the morning.
Yeah, I'm at my best, honestly. If you want to start about 1 a.m., that'd be...
We could probably do that.
The perfect time to mix.
Run all that stuff through Chandler's.
Yeah. Anyway, that's actually one of the interesting things. We're kind of debating how to finish the project. Do we go back to this same studio, which doesn't have really any outboard gear, and do it all with plugins? Do we get, it's the same stuff we say about plugins all the time. It's great. You can have a rack full of LA2As or a rack full of Chandlers or Massive Passives or Pultecs or whatever you want, and you'll know they're all there. You'll know they all work. You can recall them if you come back to retouch something later. Or do we go down the road to a place that has a big nasty SSL and all that stuff we just talked about,
but the real ones,
live and in person? I understand where people make the plugins don't sound quite the same as the real gear, but if you only have one Pultec in the room, there's only one thing you can use it on, and if you do something else with it, it basically adds a whole lot of work. Like you gotta recall the patch bay. Recalling the patch bay in Pro Tools is easy. You open the session, it sets everything up, you're done. Recalling the patch bay when you have a patch bay means John gets out a notebook and some pictures that he took,
recall sheets,
and spends some time getting busy with the patch checks. Same thing for with as touchy as analog gear is. If you don't get those knobs in exactly the right place, you're not going to get the exact same recall. Also, is that piece of vintage gear having a good day? Was it having a good day last time you used it? Is it going to still
have a good day tomorrow?
Not that reliability is a huge issue, but if you drive that thing for 6 hours hard, is it going to sound different then than when you come back to do a remix and you start off with it cold? So there's a lot of different arguments, and I'm hoping to settle a couple of them by as soon as we get the tracks out to where everybody in the project has access to them. I'm going to run over to Brother Ant's place, and we're going to do an all API mix and an all Neve mix entirely in the box, and just
sort some stuff out and see.
We're going to see what
things.
the non-studio guys in the group, well, and even the studio guys, but we're going to play them back. Like, here, what do you think of this? And what do you think of this? And just see what the thoughts are. So that'll be some real world experience. I mean, you can talk theory and philosophy and modeling and vintage goodness all you want, but at the end of the day, what happens if you actually set it up and go?
Yep.
So yeah, it's one thing when you're Tony Maserati, do you use the Tony Maserati plugins, or do you just spin around and use the original signal chain because it's still patched?
It's sad because all those guys are like, yeah, we use our own plugins. Like, oh damn, this guy's got a 96 input SSL G plus, and he's still using it costs $100. All right. You hear Dave Pensato talk about that all the time. He's like, I feel so dirty using your stuff. I wait for the clients to leave. Put up, what's the CLA plugin for this? Magic. There we go. All right. We'll make sure the door's locked.
That was actually another couple of the other discussions that came up. I've got like two more things to bring up, and then we should be just about there. The first one, and we actually did a fair amount of discussing of this at the outset. We brought it up at an original meeting when our out-of-town producer was Skyping in. What do we want to do? Do we want to work at 2496? Well, actually, that was going to be our ceiling. They had a 192 in there, but some of the inputs were coming in through a 96. So 96 kilohertz was our maximum sample rate. Our bit depth, we decided, should be 24-bit regardless. What does Pro Tools work at internally?
24. You can switch it in between anywhere.
Just one more argument for Reaper.
Yeah, whatever. you can switch between 16 all the way up to 32, and I think on a PC they do 64. But
Reaper's 64 out of the box.
Yeah.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Independent of system architecture too. But I digress. I tried so hard not to bash Pro Tools all weekend.
The next time you're at Ocean Way Studios, ask them about Reaper. Could you ask them about that for me?
All right. Which that'll be never, because whatever. I'm a live guy. But no, we actually had a fair amount of discussion about it, and then at the lunch meeting when it was just Brandon and Anthony and myself, it's like, listen, we don't know going into this where we're going to mix this down. It might get mixed down on somebody's 13-inch MacBook Pro. So, he'd asked me, like in Reaper, I mixed down a project that was 56 tracks wide, but it was only at 48K. And I didn't have any issues, but Reaper, by its nature, is a small footprint program. The plugins are small. It's meant to be a low usage program.
Right.
So I don't know if it suffers for that or whatever, but my opinion is not. So anyway, Brandon's argument was, what if we went to 44.1, saves a lot of hard drive space, makes it easier to move the projects around, share tracks and such. And, this was a couple of days after I just watched a fairly convincing presentation where a guy used a really beat up, old, cheap, consumer grade digital interface and managed to sample something that should have only been a quarter of a bit tall. So basically a good bit below the noise floor, but with proper dithering, it was right in there. So, the question of, a lot of guys like Rupert Neve feels like 192 it's getting there. He wishes sample rates were a lot higher.
My favorite Rupert Neve quote of all time is, "Oh, digital. That's where they take a perfectly good sine wave and chop it up into little bits, right?"
That was, by the way, if you're not listening to Pensato's Place, start doing that. And the first thing you should do is find the Rupert Neve episode, because I actually knew almost everything that he said from having read it different places, but this was the first time it had all been brought in to one spot. So,
the way he addresses
all
things.
single-ended architecture. The really cool thing is that they run all their internal rails at a lot higher voltage to give you an extra 12, like 90 volts DC, but it gives you 12 dB extra headroom. That's the Neve magic.
Yeah.
That, and Rupert Neve feels himself to be guided by a higher power, so all those pre's have baby Jesus in them. That's what I believe.
Think about that the nenext time you're listening to a Tool record, because they recorded on Neve's stuff. Well, some of them.
But anyway, so there's that side of things where 192 is not high enough, 360 whatever is not high enough. On the other hand, it's been validly demonstrated to me that 16/44.1 is really sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, you're not doing anything super crazy. Like, all your instruments are far within that realm. Like, there's nothing too ethereal. Even the synth stuff is not that far out where you're really going to be losing any of that quality.
Right. But this also isn't 1992 anymore. The problem with digital early on is the filters sucked. The brick wall filters sucked. So you got Nyquist errors, aliasing errors, where you would get frequencies showing up. Basically, if you try to sample a sound that's too high frequency, it shows up again. So like if the limit on your system is 20 kilohertz and you try and sample something at 22 kilohertz and the filter doesn't catch it, shows up again. It kind of loops around the block. How that happens, I'm just going to go ahead and say it's magic, because I've read that chapter in the textbook 6 or 7 times in the last decade, and I still don't get that shit.
It's still magic.
It's like then some magic happens, and that signal turns up again at 2 kilohertz. That's what sucked about digital in the early days, and that's why a lot of people still grouse. But with good brick wall filters, and actually now they're able to implement filters with incredibly steep roll-offs. Like, you hit the corner frequency, and it drops off like a Wile E. Coyote cartoon. Yeah. And so it's just not an issue anymore. Like, the quality of the gear, like, I would submit to you that quite possibly this little $100 Focusrite interface that I have has better pre's and better converters than a lot of stuff that was getting used on big name albums in the early 90s.
Yeah.
So, given the fact that well done 16-bit 44.1 is really good enough for 99.999% of what's going on in the world.
90s. It was good enough for everything that came out in the 90s.
I'm saying I'm willing to go even beyond that. I mean,
probably, but I mean, for the big point.
The thing is, and it's the whole argument. You use $1 million studio and all this expensive stuff, and it gets played back on $20 buds if you're lucky. It's a 99-cent MP3 at 128K through $10 buds. But even on slightly better stuff, like I've got a pretty good stereo in my car, and I have a couple pretty decent listening environments, but I can go into my room at work and sit down to do some post work on a piece of video or a piece of music. I can make changes that I can hear on my, and it's not even that impressive. Like I have a pair of Rocket 8s, and I run my MacBook into a Motu interface that's not all that expensive. It's about $1,000 for 8 analog ins and 8 analog outs. So when you divide that up by how much other stuff it does, there's really not a lot of dollars behind each one of those inputs and outputs. Mm-hmm. But I can make changes that are subtle enough that I can hear them through that on the Rockets, and I can't tell the difference being it in my car or on my iPod.
Right.
So at the end of the day, who are you satisfying? Like, we can make changes all day long and sit there in the studio on a pair of fantastic monitors and then send them out to a mastering studio where the guy's got, God's speakers set up in as close to a perfect listening environment as you could ever hope for, and he can make much more changes. Really, at the end of the day, what are you doing?
Yeah,
I guess it's like I hate to be a cop out, but
for what we're doing, it's not that big a deal.
I mean, and still, like, I don't want to ditch out on the ethos. Like, we do want to do our best for this, but do we want to run 6 extra miles to get to the bodega on the corner? Mm-hmm. Is what I'm saying. So anyway, just something to think about as you're setting up your own projects. Like, I don't know. I think a lot of people waste waste effort getting to somewhere that they don't need to.
Effort, space, and time, and I'm trying to get everything up to 48 now, but most of my projects are at 44.1, and I'm slowly transitioning everything, like all new stuff's going to 48 just to be safe. But
right, really the big thing is bit depth, though. Like if you can get to 24-bit,
yeah, everything's just
you do better, but only on the quiet sounds. If you're making a loud rock record, you might not ever even see the benefits of 24-bit.
Right.
Honestly. But anyway, that was. I don't know if you were in the room when I had the conversation. I was the out of town producer, and I were in the room. He's like, "So what are we at here? We must be at least at 90, 96."
Nope, 44.1, and he was angry. He's like, "Not even 48." And like you, me, and Brandon were all just like,
"Were we all in the room?"
No,
yeah,
we're not at even 48. But all the listen,
but
dude.
At the end of it, we're like, all right, well, I explained to him that, like, look, man, I've seen all the demos. Like 44.1. Like, it's going to wind up at 44.1.
Right.
So we're saving ourselves doing a bunch of conversions, which are, it's a failure mode, basically. Like, how your computer or your processor does that math has an effect on the sound. So, like, in the end, his argument was like, well, I've just found that in certain environments, with the right dither, going from 192 or even 96, in certain situations, it makes a little bit of a difference. And we were just like, yep,
okay,
44.1 it is.
Yeah, like, all right, you want to go back? We're going to go home if you want to retrack everything.
And like he wasn't being snooty about it. Neither were we. Like in the end of it, he was like, I guess it'll do. It's like it wasn't a deal breaker.
Like, why not make it sound the best you could at 44.1 than having all that extra space and making it sound great in there and then having to work again?
That's actually something I need to find. I need to comb the internet and see if I can find empirical data on that, because I've read a lot about sample rate and bit depth even before we got into this project, and the consensus seems to be that it's really just the quality of your converters. Like even the same good converter can actually sound worse at 192 than at 96 or 48.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, guys that do these listening tests, they just do a test for themselves. And they don't actually post any. They either don't have the equipment to give you empirical data, or they don't bother to do it. But guys with good ears that have great gear and make big records, if they can sit down and say, this Black Lion or this whatever, stratospheric halo converter, if they can hear the difference and the higher sample rate doesn't sound as good, is it really worth pursuing? And actually, I got to find it. I can't remember if it's something I read or if it's something I heard on Pensado's Place. That's the problem when your day job is also your hobby. You absorb a whole lot of information, and it's hard to keep track of it all at some point.
Pensado's Place with the guy from Avid.
I think it was, but it's not the only place I've heard it. But anyway, there's a school of thought. A lot of people actually believe that there is an optimal sampling rate, and it's not any of the ones that gets used. It's actually supposed to be somewhere in the 50 to 60 kilohertz range. So I'm gonna try and track that down and see if we could find it, because that's the problem. Is just you're getting down to quantum physics. Like electrons can only move so fast, and like light's real fast, but you chop time up into small enough increments, and just machinery has a hard time keeping up with it. Like, I know it's possible to get to 192 or 320 with a box.
Right.
But, how much audio are you really capturing at that point? Like, how much of a sine wave can you get? Like, what are those voltages doing? What are the slew rates in there? So,
and with your end game being what it's going to be, like, no one's going to be listening to this in a mastering room. People are going to be listening to it in their cars, on their boombox at home, on their iPod earbuds.
So really, I guess the takeaway is it all boils down to, with digital, it's not so much the rate, it's the quality of the filters, it's the quality of the components in the converters, and it's also the way that your DAW shifts from whatever high bit rate or whatever high sample rate it works at internally and high bit rate internally, the way that it converts those numbers down to what's ultimately going to either be 16-bit 44.1 going to a CD, or somewhat less than that going to a 128K MP3. Yeah. It ain't the motion, it's the meat in this case, or I don't know.
It's not the motion of the ocean, it's the
it's the waves. By the way, Waves plugins are on sale. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Waves plugins are always on sale. Stop posting that on Reddit.
But it's a different one today.
It's, all right. So yeah, let's pretty much beat that horse to death, and we went over the hour mark. So
cool. All
right. Well, hope that was interesting. Hope that was edifying for those of you that haven't been on a session. That was a little bit of a description and a walkthrough. Hope the patch-based stuff was interesting. If you have any questions or comments, by all means, hit the comment link right below this on the blog if that's where you're watching it, or you can comment on YouTube where these are posted. You can dig up our email addresses if you hit the blog, which once again is at smart2noise.blogspot.com. You can search us out on Facebook and Twitter. We are on Facebook. Yeah, you start smart2noise. That's all words, no numbers. And on what's the Twitter handle?
Smart to Noise blog.
Is it the number 2 or is it TO?
The number 2.
Okay, so on Twitter we are at smart the number 2 noise blog at Twitter
something
internet.
We should wrap this up before it gets hairy.
I forgot how to internet. The thing! No, the other thing!
It's only midnight, dude.
We're making an early one out of it. All right. So anyway, as usual, we know that was roundabout. We know it was just a couple of guys yakking, but that's what we do. That's what we did for 2 hours before we turn the recorder on, and that's what we're going to do for another half hour, 45 minutes before we go to bed. And you get to be privy to that.
I don't know how I feel about that.
It's like we're old friends. What, about still talking about audio before?
No, Bit Crushing is following me on Twitter.
Yuck. I don't even know what bit crushing is, but it sounds like it's a sounds like digital circa 1992 to me.
Is what it sounds like.
Oh yeah, I was gonna start talking about truncation, but let's not.
We don't have time for that.
Let's not do math at this point. We'll get Brandon on and have him talk about truncation.
Just give him a notepad and let him have at it.
Yeah, we're gonna need a whiteboard for the next podcast. So anyway, hope that was educational. Hope it was useful. Please, by all means, reach out and touch us. Let us know what you thought. Actually, don't let us know what you thought because we don't care. We're going to keep this doing whether you like it or not. If you liked it, though, let us know. If you thought it was funny, if you thought it was useful, we appreciate knowing that. If you have ideas, stuff you'd like us to talk about on future podcasts, questions you'd like answered, by all means, do that. And Mic Trick Week. Actually, it was not a flop. That went pretty well. We just brought out 5 not something you hear every day mic tricks, put them up there, one a day. It was very well received. Our friend Ika from Germany wrote in with, I actually haven't had the brain power to even begin to decipher what he was talking about. But
There's some crazy math stuff going on there.
It sounds mad cool, and he's pioneering some new techniques with that. But if you have any crazy mic tricks, any odd things that you've done, either out of creativity or, let's face it, desperation, send those in to us. And next time we do a Mic Trick Week, we'll put it up there. We'll give you credit.
Yeah.
And that's what you get. You get a shout out because we don't have any corporate sponsors. We don't have any gear to give away yet. Which
we're actually short on gear ourselves.
Yeah. If you have any gear you'd like to donate, we can give you a tax deductible receipt for that. So we both work for churches.
I don't know if I can authorize that, but you're more than welcome to.
You can donate it to me. I'll give you a tax exemption receipt for it, and then I'll donate it to Anthony's church. All right. So that's it. That was the.
What? There's all kinds of legal repercussions, I'm pretty sure, for what you just said.
Not at all.
If we stop talking about
it. Dude, our churches swap gear all the time. How much stuff of yours do I have permanently on loan and vice versa?
I don't know. I've got half an amp rack of yours. So.
And I've got your drum overheads, and you got mine. And
whatever.
It's all completely above board.
Let's close this down.
All right, fair enough. Anyway, this has been the Smart to Noise Ratio per audio podcast. Thanks for hanging with us. Thanks for showing up, even when we don't. We'll see you next week, guys. Take care.
Have a good night.